Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I have a lot of voices. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Georgie Pongyesva. I am born for the Rabbit Tobacco Clan through my dad and reside on Third Mesa of the Hopi Reservation, the village of Hopevilla. I previously have worked for 4 years for the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office, and through that work I learned so much and was able to participate in a whole bunch of spring projects with the Forest Service and on the Kaibab National Forest, and as well as Coconino National Forest and Tonto, done some work there. And then the closest to my heart was a project that got to do out in Hopi, which was a restoration of a spring, like how Max kind of talked about some of the projects, and he was a part of it as well, thanks to Hopi Water Resources. And yeah, now I'm a contracted tribal liaison with Grand Staircase-Escalante partners, and it's wonderful being out here in this landscape and just getting to participate in this, so thank you. So today, I know it's a lot of information to cram into 15 minutes, but we'll work with it. So springs are very, very important to us as Indigenous people, but as Hopis, it's one of our most sacred resources. I think, so here's some pictures of some springs that from this one's in Escalante and then in Arizona on different projects. I grew up in Oak Creek Canyon outside of Sedona, Arizona, actually born into spring water. So springs have always been just a huge part of my life. And for the next slide. Oh, I don't know. Okay, great. So I think in order, I know, and there were questions earlier that kind of, I feel like we have to go over our history in order to kind of have this understanding of how Indigenous people view our what we call natural resources and landscapes, and our perspectives on that. So I think it's important. This is a map of federally recognized tribes, but at one point we were all over the country, and landscapes overlap where there's no borders. We don't see borders, and I think it's important to understand that there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. There's also state recognized, unrecognized tribes. Federally recognized tribes gives you that government to government relationship, but there are tribes that don't want to be recognized by the government and exercise their sovereignty in that way. So I know in this Western perspective and policy, often we're umbrellaed under one homogenous people, but every tribe has their own culture, language, creation stories, sacred places, and that are tied to our histories. So that's an important thing to understand, I think, for the general public. Next slide. So in order to get that kind of understanding, because I know it was brought up earlier, like what was asked of our Walpi relatives here, of like the use, right, and how we view. So I think it's important to understand the different perspectives on land and resources and religious worldviews. So from an Anglo-European settler perspective, religion is based on written doctrine. It's sacred spaces are, spaces that are built by man, but also sacred as long as people congregate in them. But often you can see like churches have been abandoned or repurposed, or so that is different. And the view on land and wildlife and natural resources is a commodity to be owned, controlled, and profited from. And this idea of domination over nature, which creates borders and barriers, dams, and to try and control these resources from a human perspective. And the next slide. So from a Native American perspective, we all have different cultures and languages, but we all have the same relationship with our landscapes and our environment. And it's a religious worldview and of spirituality that is intrinsically tied to the natural world and the landscape, and everything is connected. We don't see ourselves as separated from it. We're a part of it. And we are stewards of our environment and our earth. And that's everything from the little insects to birds to, we think about everything from above, below, and in all directions. So we live in a symbiotic relationship with our land, wildlife, and what we call natural resources. We're stewards of the land, there's no ownership over land. It's very powerful. There are things out here in these environments, our deities dwell there. And as you know, as outdoor people, I'm sure you've been humbled in your experience often on the landscape, because we are a small part of this greater world. And that's also, you know, to the sky as well, to what's below. Linked to sacred sites through language, migration. For us, for Hopi, language, migrations, oral history, songs, ceremonies, pilgrimages, and continue to renew spiritual power to these places. So in Hopi, we emerged from the Grand Canyon, and we migrated at the confluence. We migrated in all different directions around, they say, the world, but you can see evidence of that. They left Hopi footprints, they call them Hopi footprints. You can see architecture, like some of these cliff dwelling sites, or the sites that you see on the ancestral Puebloan sites, petroglyphs and pictographs and pottery shards are what we view as our Hopi footprints when you say. So in that same, so we continue to honor these traditions that are linked to these places of significance that are passed through our oral history. So that it's based on our oral history. So that's not anything written besides like petroglyphs and pictographs. And then the spirit world is intimately linked to the natural world, therefore respected. It should be respected and left undisturbed. So when we affect something like the groundwater, was just being talked about, they say, you know, there's consequences for that, and we don't know how to measure groundwater and how far that goes. And there's Hopi oral history that's connected to that, the powers that are underneath, and they should not be disturbed, as well as the air. So it's, you know, it's a, like she was just talking about with the climate change, we're seeing some of the effects of this way we've been handling our domination over nature in this Western kind of viewpoint. So we do not abandon these places. These are living landscapes, they're cultural landscapes, they continue to be sacred to us. So when you hear like an archaeologist talk about an isolated occurrence, or that's totally false. These are all connected, all the sites are connected, the trails, pilgrimage routes. It's like when you visit those places, there's pilgrimages that are taken to these places, to springs, to water sources. Prayers are offered, and that's like a renewal of that energy, of that vibration of the earth, almost like a spiritual meridian on the earth that holds that sacredness. The desecration of these places like include development, mining, road construction, logging, fracking, pipelines, development, recreation, over visitation. And so when these things are happening, you see the effects on the ecosystem and those places, and that causes, you know, those negative effects, and those deities to sometimes leave those places, and it affects them in that way. Next slide. I usually go down and break down the policies of the 20th century when it comes to Native people, starting with the Antiquities Act, which defined us as a cultural resource and didn't actually give us any rights to all the things that were taken out of the ground through archaeology and put in museums. And then now we're in this phase of repatriation. But the policy of the 20th century, or this last, 20th century, the Environmental Policy Act, we were, it doesn't really, for Indigenous people, protecting the environment, water and plants, nature, is important as material culture. So that's often not defined in policy throughout the 20th century. And honestly, we didn't even really get the right to our dead until NAGPRA of 1990. So that was our first human rights law that gave us that right to repatriate, but that even brings a lot of issues for tribal preservation offices. And often it's very hard through these policies to define Native sacred sites. So they don't really see them from that Western perspective. We see them as resources to be used and profited from, commodified from, and we don't often see them as in that viewshed. So when it comes to policy, it's kind of hard to sometimes protect these places through that lens. The next slide. And so I think this, when I learned this in college, and it took going to college to learn this, and that's why I try to include this, because we didn't get the right to practice our religion until 1978. That is pretty recent history as the original people of this these lands. And I think that's really important, even now that this policy doesn't necessarily hold much weight, because it's very hard to define, like we talked about earlier, with, you know, people often see like what we would see as a sacred site through our oral history and that cultural knowledge. Someone would just see like, oh, that's just a rock, or that's just a spring. So it's hard to define that through this political lens. And so that's hopefully through education can start changing some of those things. So next slide. And so Hopi that's like see like this, the land is my life. This is what it looks like out in Hopi. You can see it's a pretty arid landscape, and our villages, so springs are very, very sacred to us. Like they're talking about in the desert, you know, that water source. And when you find a spring in the water source, like you can see all the life that comes to it, from the insects to the birds to the plants to all of it. You know, we all need water to survive. It's crazy to me to think like, see how people don't understand that, like all the money in the world won't save you if you don't have clean air, clean water, clean land and seeds. Like very simple survival 101, but it's such a complex concept for many people. Next slide. So just a little bit of Hopi culture, history, and connections. So we are peaceful people. The pillars, we're based on respect, reciprocity, humility, communities, and stewardship. We actually, upon our emergence, made a covenant with the caretaker of this earth to be stewards of this earth, and that's how we're allowed to be here. So that's deeply ingrained in our culture and religion. And so everything is done with that purpose in mind, and we think of all life. It's not just about us. It's about even to the tiniest little insect. And water is so powerful. We are dry farmers. So for the men practice dry farming, that's based solely on rainwater, which is a spiritual meditation that you have with the landscape in order and ceremonial to call the rain. And it's very powerful. And that's based, and so through our migration history, that is how they left these footprints on the earth to, you know, not only now we are actually, you know, using them to try and protect different areas and resources, but also as that collective memory. That's how these ceremonies were learned. That's how we learned where these places are and where the springs are. Like all of that was through migration. And that's how Hopi was founded, or the villages we are in now were all founded around springs. So we're located on Black Mesa in northeastern Arizona. There's 3 mesas and 12 autonomous villages, and we never were removed from the Hopi mesas. And yes, like I said, this ceremony is intrinsically tied to seasonal cycles, and so that's based also on, you know, the celestial cycles and the different seasonal changes. And like I said, we think about not only us, it's not from a human perspective, it's above, below, in all directions. So next slide. And so these are just some kind of pictures. So we still use our springs ceremonially, and also in Hopeville, our village, my village that I come from. So traditionally the women would use the springs to have terrace gardens, and they take turns it's an intricate irrigation system down. That's really amazing. And it's a communal, everyone has their own plot, but they share the different, you know, because the water, it'll refill, and then they work to you know, water their plants each week. So that's how women garden near the villages, and then the men have their fields, usually away from the mesas, and that's all based on the rainwater. Next slide. Through our migrations, you see all over the Southwest Colorado Plateau, these sites and most of them all have springs next to them that I've been to. So you can tell, or waterways, and so you can tell that they, through their migrations, they were following these paths of water, and that's all maintained in that collective oral history, that memory. So because it's not based on written doctrine, like the Western world often, that a Bible or different written doctrines can be rewritten by man or used to like go travel overseas and conquer landscapes and conquer people or different ways like that. Through oral history, it's based not only on that collective memory that is passed through to you and the traditional ecological knowledge that was learned through our migrations and our just living on the landscapes and being a part of it through adaptation and observation over all these years. So that's an oral history that's passed through based on that collective memory, but also on your personal experience at that place. So when you go visit that place, it's like almost like a mnemonic device. Like it helps you recall that oral history, that memory of that teaching, and that's how it has transcended over centuries since time immemorial. And next slide. This is just a upward kind of top-down look at the Hope Villa Spring Gardens. So you can see just the life that comes around the springs, and we live very close to our environments out there. And we, climate change has really been evident, and I know we see it all over out here. We really saw it. We're in really bad drought, and then it rained, and you could just see like everything. Like the critters were just so thirsty; they were gnawing on the wood. Like it was just so heartbreaking. And then we got rain, and you literally see everything come to life, from like the insects, then butterflies and birds. Like it's amazing to see like the plant. It just comes to life. So that's the power of water. And as we just learned from the groundwater, and things are based on precipitation, there is esoteric knowledge in plants that have specific stories on, springs for Hopi, and that's not my place to share, but I can share what my experience has been. But just the thought, this water is coming from the ground, and I've worked with like Springs Institute on the Kaibab Plateau, and they've done studies where trying to figure out how far groundwater goes. And there's like sinkholes out on the Kaibab, and I think they use like dye studies, and then they came all the way out by Montezuma's well. So that just goes to show we have no concept of what is happening underground and then how far our water travels. And that is very concerning when it comes to things like fracking, mining, big agriculture, all these different things that can affect the groundwater, and also the rain, because when you overgraze, when you clear cut, when you do these things in our belief system, there are certain plants, certain trees, certain things that are rain callers. They help bring the rain. And so when you start decimating those landscapes and taking out those ecosystems, that's going to have that effect on your landscape. So we wonder why climate change is happening. We're developing everything. We're sucking the wells dry. We're drilling from a human perspective because it's all about us, right? But we're not thinking about everything else that depends on that resource. And we need diversity for survival. We need pollinators. We need to incorporate all these things that are found around springs and water in our ceremonies. They're represented within that, because they're all, we're all praying for the same thing out in these arid landscapes. We're all praying for that moisture, and springs are such a blessing in that way. So next slide. So I know they were talking about plants earlier, and again, we're all connected, and the plants have such a huge part of our lifeways in this world. And so they bring the pollinators, and that's how the food is grown, and that's how these things the birds, everything is connected. So These are some pictures from just some of the research. You can see, this was during the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project research. And we're just seeing how springs were being affected by those pipelines, and then in New Mexico with the fracking. And, again, like when you cut through that water source to take it, it's like almost like putting a dam in a river is like almost like putting a stop on your vein, like it's the vein of life of the earth. And so it's really important for us to understand that. Our relationship with the plants and the pollinators, like they also say with plants, like if we over collect them, and that's the reciprocity. When we go out anywhere, when we go places, we, say a prayer and we say there are deities and things that live in around these places, and they can be life givers, so they can take life. They're very powerful. So it's just like the power of water, it can give life, but it can also take it. So it's very important to acknowledge those things when you're going out there, visit them with respect and not damage or desecrate in any way. Blocking water has consequences in our belief system. They say if you block water, then it will find another course and it won't return. So a lot of the ways that we have done our restoration projects and stuff, we use like check dams to help with like where the water can kind of flow through, but not totally blocking it, to help with that erosion and different things like that. And that's also used in farming. And we've seen that also in sites like Hoganweave and different places, which was really cool as well. So like I said, so springs like are traditional cultural properties, but often in policy in different ways, like they're not as protected because they're also seen as like those resources for people and youth. So, but for tribes, they're very, very sacred resources, and that have deep layered meaning. And again, they're mnemonic devices, and they're also almost like portals that connect the sky, the earth, and the ground in that way. So they're very, very special things. And also there's things that dwell around them as well. So, and so these are just some pictures of Hopi. Like we think about the things that are in the earth, the cisterns. Often you can find, catching the rainwater on some of these migration routes or around the mesas. And then the plants that are found around springs that are ceremonial, powerful plants, like sacred datura. And there's evidence of those even in petroglyphs that you'll see around the Southwest as well. So, and like I said, when plants are to be respected as well, you can't just go out and gather a whole bunch of plants because they say that they won't show up and they won't come back. It's that respect and that reciprocity. So as humans these days, we don't really think about that. We think about, what can I take, but what do we give back? We're not, and so when we go out to these places, like water, like different clans go out for their ceremony purposes, things are collected for those ceremonies, and their prayers are offered and in those places, and definitely respected. So impacts to springs, cattle, probably that's a big one out here on these public lands. We see a lot. They can be very, very detrimental, not only to like the ecosystem as far as the plant life, but also to the springs, because they'll just go right up there and they'll just tear them up, and then they kind of like go to the bathroom around there, and it just contaminates it, pulls up all the plants, and so it has an effect on all the things that depend on that spring. Through spring restoration projects we've done, where we've done fencing projects, we actually might have one out here in the summertime. So with tribal youth, and then cultural advisors, and that's a great way we found on the landscape, like, because often like that knowledge, that oral history we're finding is getting kind of, with the technology and nowadays, it's not getting as passed down, or so it's great for these projects to get kids and youth out on the landscape with cultural advisors and hopefully a place where they don't get reception on their cell phone. They make those connections and learn about these things, and then hopefully in this new era of cooperative co-stewardship, you know, spark their interest and get them into some of these positions as land managers, and then incorporating this traditional ecological knowledge, which is on the same standard. I mean, scientific standard. It is. It's like, that's what I always found very interesting about archaeology and all these, and management and conservation. Like in the past, it's a guessing game. It's all just bet, let's do this and think it won't have a cause and effect on what's gonna happen. And then they have to come back and mitigate that prescription that they made for that conservation. And instead of speaking with tribal people who have been, you know, managing these lands since time immemorial, we've lived as a part of them through observation, adaptation. And so we know, like, there's indicator species that tell us when to plant. We see the water levels, and we've also experienced the traumas that can happen through mining and industry. Like for us out in Hopi, Black Mesa, the coal mine, they were slurring coal using the Navajo aquifer, and they were slurring millions and millions of gallons like a day. Like there's so much water, and it dropped the aquifer so much that we saw contamination within springs, like on the mesas. So with arsenic levels and stuff, because that water table dropped. And there's no way of measuring that. That's pristine water that is underground that we are, you know, contaminating. And then where does that go? And so that's something to think about. And so like, again, blocking water, cement. Most of the springs that I've seen, because in the 40s, the Conservation Corps came out to Hopi, did a whole bunch of spring projects, but they use cement like this out there. And a lot of them that I've seen, there's no water anymore. So that's an instance of when you block water, there are consequences for that. This was part of our spring restoration project. And you can see invasive species like Russian olive suck so much water. That's what is our project out in Hopi that we did on Howepa Spring by Bakavia on Third Mesa. And we literally removed a huge Russian olive tree and saw that. And then phase 2, we had to dig the roots out because they were literally going up the spring like little sponges and sucking it out. And when we cut them out, cut the roots, it was literally pouring out water. That's how much water is in there. So, and then, and the next slide, so you can see how that happens. We don't have time to show that video, but if you would like, you can also Google Hopi Spring Restoration. There's 2 videos that come up. It's the Howepa, that's the phase 1 of our video, but this is the, some of what came out of it. So, you can see the water came back after the removal of that Russian olive tree. We can go to the next slide. And then, so work like this is a step in the right direction. So taking that holistic approach, including tribes in that traditional ecological knowledge in this work as we move forward in cooperative co-stewardship is necessary, like archaeology, management of the lands, like try to remove from public lands in order to create them, and then create this untouched, untamed wilderness idea, which is totally false because we are always here managing landscapes and taking care of them. So it creates, working with tribes, you're filling in a huge gap, like archaeologists too, like it's basically a guessing game until you're, you know, having that collaboration. So, and it's a good place to start the healing process. It's about building those relationships, not only with each other, but also with the landscape and our sacred resources. And so here's a before and after picture of the spring project, the Howepa Spring project. That was the Russian olive tree that was taking up, and you can see it was dark. It was like no bueno. And then that is what the spring looked like. It was barely even bare. And after it was removed, and this was like early on, but now we're seeing vegetation, the native vegetation, sacred datura, different things coming back to that area. And the spring is coming back. The water started rising immediately when we removed that Russian olive. And this was based on the memory of actually my dad, who took me that spring. He couldn't believe it when we walked up to it because it used to be a whole pool that he used to take to take a sheep to, and he couldn't believe that it was like that. So that's how this was born. Next slide. So we hold this very sacred water resources, and all this, the natural world. And I just want to, I always like to, what do we value? We have to really think about that in this world today. And what do we hold sacred? And I know we all hold value and sacredness within these landscapes, because that's why, we're here. This is why we're doing this work. We all have value in it. And I think it's important to find those common values to come together and, to work towards protecting and creating this understanding in this viewpoint, instead of this human perspective that we are dominant over nature. Because as we're seeing now, nature is taking it back and it's showing us, it's waking up. We need to take care of these things. We need to stop being so disconnected from it and remember that we are a part of it. Next slide. So just some tips. So working with tribes, it's about creating partnerships. Collaboration and consultation are dependent on building lasting trust relationships. So much mistrust and trauma has been done in the past that it's often hard to trust government agencies, or people often, they just come through and are like, oh, we consulted on section 106, we'll check the box and we'll still do whatever we want. So in this new era of cooperative co-stewardship, it's still being defined right now. And we need to really make sure that we both have this equal seat at the table, because that's how we are gonna face climate change in the future. We have that knowledge on how to combat some of these issues. If only these powers that be would listen and apply those things and incorporate, us into those decision-making processes, not after the fact. And then when you're going to a tribal nation, you need to understand that you're going to there's different tribal protocols, there's different sensitivities to native issues and different things. So you're going almost to another country. So you need to respect those protocols within the community, and it's best to just sometimes listen. And best to always meet face to face. Zoom is so impersonal. So it's about building those personal relationships, and then, finding those common values. Confidentiality. When you take information, if you're writing something, if you're taking information, you can't just go take. That's reciprocity. You can't just go extract esoteric knowledge or traditional knowledge and then write about it, and then give credit where it's due and be respectful and understand the confidentiality of that, because some things just shouldn't be shared and are protected in that way. Don't be a box checker. Consultation does not mean consent. That's huge. Kind of always dealt with that in CPO. And listen and learn. Give credit where credit's due. And every tribe is different, but everyone likes to eat. So food is always a good way to bring everyone together. And then the next slide, one more slide. And so here's our intertribal Grand Staircase-Escalante, our first meeting on working towards this new resource management plan, science plan that's coming up. But, we're looking forward to bringing everyone out here and hopefully getting more of that bridge between our communities, and also the reciprocity, because, we can also bring it back to the community as well. So, we're making those bridges, and I think we're going in the right direction. So, thank you, everyone.